G'day blokes and Sheilas, this is Voyager the Second here. Today we are back with another episode of Intercity Public Transport Projects Showcases. Now, in today's episode, we will be showcasing the North Coast Fast Rail. Part 1 that is, which will feature a proposal between Sydney and Newcastle via the Central Coast. This is part 1 of the North Coast Fast Rail. We will hopefully cover other showcases featuring rail proposals to Orange, Canberra, Nowra based off the state government's proposals, but instead of just showing them the basic features, we will be showing the full alignment. So without further ado, let's showcase the project on the PowerPoint and then we will head off to the alignment. The technical features of the rail, the fast rail that is, will involve 156 kilometers of rail line between Sydney and Newcastle. Now, the current distance between Sydney and Newcastle interchange is 166, but with new alignments and deviations, the total distance will be reduced to 156 kilometers. So we will have a 156 kilometer rail journey between Sydney and Newcastle. Now, the initial top speed, which will be on the newly built tracks, will be 200 kilometers per hour. However, we do have the potential to design the speeds to allow trains to run at 350 kilometers per hour. This will be used for future high-speed rail, which could potentially be extended not just to Coffs Harbour from Port Macquarie, but we could potentially extend it up to Brisbane, and trains on the new alignments could run at 350 kilometers per hour. The new alignments will be 86 kilometers long, so we will be building 86 kilometers of new track, and that's going to mean that 70 kilometers of this line will be on existing track. The track gauge would be obviously 1435mm, which is the current standard gauge in New South Wales, and the maximum slope will be 1 in 30, and this is also very important, especially on the section between Hawkesbury River and Cowan, or I should say the Hawkesbury River and Barara. Now, the benefits of a fast rail between Sydney and Newcastle will be big. Now, note that Sydney, Newcastle and the Central Coast are the 3 largest urban areas in New South Wales, if we exclude Queanbeyan, which is part of Canberra, and Tweed Heads, which is part of the Gold Coast. Now, for the benefits, we will have a 23-minute time savings between Sydney and the Central Coast, and that's only per trip. And so if you add that up to an entire week of commuting, it will be accumulated to nearly 4 hours per week. 45 minutes will be saved between Sydney and Newcastle per trip, which will accommodate up to 7 hours per week. With the 45-minute savings, you can travel from Sydney to Newcastle in 1 hour and 45 minutes instead of the current 2.5 hours on the fastest trains. And there will also be business and employment opportunities. Now, this opportunity is driven by the fact that you can now have easy access to the Central Coast and Newcastle, and that would allow businesses to invest into those regions and start up new businesses and generate new jobs, and that would really tackle unemployment, especially in the Central Coast and Newcastle regions where youth unemployment is at a very high. Construction stages are important. Now, we have to construct the rail line in stages while the trains are in operation. So the first stage of construction will involve the full quadruplication between Epping and Strathfield. Now, note that some sections of track between Epping and Strathfield are already 4 tracks, but we still need to quadruplicate the line to further accommodate more trains. And we will also remodel the Strathfield junction so that we can allow suburban trains to run on the sides while the intercity trains can bypass the stations on the middle 2 tracks. And the most important part of construction to reduce travel times between Sydney, the Central Coast and Newcastle will be the Woy Woy to Barara tunnel. Now, Cowan Bank and going through the Hawkesbury River is relatively slow, but with the Woy Woy to Berowra tunnel, it will save you about 10 minutes on each trip. And then there will be the Wyong to Cockle Creek high-speed rail deviation, which will reduce travel times between the Central Coast and Newcastle by 22 minutes. And then most importantly, there will be the Berowra to Epping tunnel, which will further reduce travel times and increase easier access to the Central Coast and Newcastle. And so these 4 stages will reduce travel times between Sydney and Newcastle down to an hour and 45 minutes. Now note that there will be some future bypasses, especially between Woy Woy and Wyong when we would build a future high-speed rail projects, especially up to Brisbane in the distant future. But for now, we will just let the fast trains run on existing tracks between Woy Woy and Wyong, Cockle Creek and Newcastle interchange, and Epping to Central. For the stopping patterns and services, these are your stopping patterns. Sydney Central, with all trains starting at Sydney Central. Now this is express stopping pattern. We'll start at Sydney Central, all express trains will stop at Strathfield, and they will either stop at Epping or Hornsby to either interchange with the Sydney Metro or to interchange with the North Shore Line. This could be an option for you guys if you want, but there will be an optional stop for all express trains to stop at Woy Woy. There will be a stop at Gosford where all intercity trains, all express trains rather, will stop, and then there will be Tuggerah or Wyong, which are 2 stations which the express trains will stop at. They don't stop at both Tuggerah or Wyong. And then there's also Cardiff or Broadmeadow, and then obviously all the intercity express trains will stop at Hamilton and Newcastle interchange. Now note regarding the deviations, some local Central Coast and Newcastle line services will operate on the new deviation. And trains will run from Sydney to Newcastle every 15 minutes, and that's going to be in the off-peak. Well, actually, rather, we could run it during the peaks. Doesn't really matter. But potentially we would run an express service every 30 minutes and 2 different local services per hour. And what I mean by 2 different local services per hour is I mean that these local services are not the same, but the stopping patterns repeat every hour. Now, if you don't get what I'm talking about, let me show you this. Now, these are your express services. There will be 2 of these per hour, and these are your local services, 2 local services per hour, but both local services are different. So the all stations bits, some stations will be served every hour, especially the smaller local stations in the Central Coast and Newcastle regions. In the peak hour though, this could be doubled to express trains running every 15 minutes and the local services running every 30 minutes if we can accommodate these services. In regards to the rolling stock, it is very important that we have high-speed rail rolling stock. Now the rolling stock will be 8 cars long, from 170 to 200 meter long cars. It will be 2x2 seating, featuring luggage racks, toilets in every second car. It will be about 800 seats if we were to let the train run an 8-car service at a 200 meter length. There will also be standing room available when the trains do get overcrowded, and obviously the top speed of the trains would be 200 kilometers per hour. So now we will move on to the alignment, and we will show you the alignment from Central to Newcastle interchange. So this is the full 156 kilometer alignment between Sydney and Newcastle. Now notice that there is a spur just west of Newcastle. Now that spur will be for a future extension to Port Macquarie, which will be showcased in another episode. Now I'm only showing the stations where express services will stop at. So they will stop at Strathfield, either Epping or Hornsby, Woy Woy, Gosford, Tuggerah or Wyong, Cardiff or Broadmeadow, and definitely all trains will stop at Hamilton or Newcastle interchange. So without further ado, let's present the full alignment from Sydney to Newcastle. I also forgot to do the color coding, but currently we are showing yellow tracks, which will mean that it's just existing alignment, nothing will be changed. Now, obviously, express trains will start and terminate at Central and run along the existing main suburban line all the way up to Strathfield, where all express trains will stop at Strathfield. And also at Strathfield there'll be a junction realignment at Strathfield to allow for express trains to run in the middle of the tracks, while the slower trains would run on the side of the tracks. Now this section here in green or in turquoise is going to involve a quadruplication, and then it will continue further up north. This one will need no work required because it's already quadruplicated. But from Concord West, from south of Rhodes, the line will have to be quadruplicated over the Parramatta River all the way out to West Ryde. Now from West Ryde, this is the only work that needs to be done. And obviously from West Ryde, the entire track is quadruplicated all the way up to Epping. But just before Epping, the trains will descend and then stop at Epping or bypass Epping depending on their stopping service. Now there will be 2 underground platforms at Epping with potentially maybe a bypassing platform. And then on the underground, trains will continue further north to Hornsby. Some trains will stop at Hornsby, some won't. And then from Hornsby the trains will climb further up north under a new tunnel, bypassing the upper north shore up to Barara. Now note here that this section is when trains don't yet run to the city under the new tunnels between Barara and Epping. Now this is where a track connector will be built. Moving on, now the line will descend around here. This is Cowan Bank, and it will descend all the way underneath the Hawkesbury River, and it will join the existing North Main line just southwest of Woy Woy. And then here they join at Woy Woy, and all trains will stop at Woy Woy. If you guys think that all trains should stop at Woy Woy. And then from Woy Woy the line will continue further north and run on the existing North Main line with another stop at Gosford. Now all trains will stop at Gosford because it's a very important station in the Central Coast. Moving on, it will continue north, bypass most of the existing stations, and then accelerate to around 130 kilometers an hour, passing through Rimba. And some trains will stop at either Tuggerah or Wyong. Now it's either Tuggerah or Wyong. The express trains don't stop at both, although the local services will. And then from Wyong there's going to be another deviation built just north of Wyong at around Watanobe, and then the tracks would deviate there. Now this purple line is new alignment, and the red that I was talking about, that's actually just another tunnel which will be built under Halloran or whatever you pronounce it. And then the line will continue further north. There's also another tunnel there. Now this section will allow trains to run at 350 kilometers an hour for its design speed, but the trains will only run up to 200 kilometers an hour when the full alignment is complete, unless we were to allow for high-speed rail to run between Sydney and further up north. And now there is a branch here which I will not showcase yet, because this will be a future alignment all the way to Port Macquarie and potentially all the way up to Brisbane. But now all the express trains to Newcastle will branch off the express line and will decelerate down to 150 kilometers an hour on this section, or possibly only just down to 130. and then they will join the existing main line and abide by the current speed limits. It will join the line around Cockle Creek or Bullery, depending on what you want to call it. Now the line will continue on the existing North Main Line with a stop at Cardiff. Now some trains will stop at Cardiff, some won't, depending on their stopping patterns. The same with Epping and Hornsby and Tuggerah and Wyong. The line will continue on the existing North Main Line up to Broadmeadow, and then all trains will stop at Hamilton and Newcastle Interchange. Now we may need to add an additional platform at Newcastle Interchange to accommodate the extra services. And also note that Broadmeadow will be an alternate stop, competing with Cardiff. So anyway guys, this is the full alignment, 155 kilometers of it, trains running at 200 kilometers an hour, and would allow you to travel from Sydney to Newcastle in an hour and 45 minutes. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video on Facebook or wherever. I will see you next time. Stay subscribed for more future proposals. Goodbye for now.